Welcome to the next installment of Stories from the Dark. The appointment. Elizabeth sat alone at the cafe for what must have been drawing near an hour. She'd gotten used to being stood up and had even stood up a few lunch dates herself. But that didn't stop her from sipping an extra glass of wine with her panini. Elizabeth was too busy for romance on most days. She worked very hard at the office and rarely allowed herself much time out. The empty chair across from her reminded her why that was. Elizabeth sat at her usual table, staring through the large windows that faced the streets. Illuminated by the noon sun, Elizabeth couldn't help from rubbing her temple. The day seemed particularly bright. She thought about her life and what had led her here. She couldn't remember any mistake that she made that she would go back and change. She was proud of her life, yet she still felt kind of empty somehow. "Is this seat taken?" A man's voice woke her from her thoughtful trance. Startled, Elizabeth looked up to see a well-dressed gentleman who looked only a few years older than her. Gentleman was not just a general politeness when describing this man. He was extremely well kept, and kept himself in a proper fashion that was both non-threatening and humble. This was not Elizabeth's date, but he'd do. No, Elizabeth stammered. "Not at all. Go right ahead." "Oh, thank you," the handsome man said, as he took his seat. "I actually have an appointment to keep, and I'm a little early. I hope you don't mind if I pass the time with you. I hate to sit alone." "Well, my appointment was cancelled, so I could use the company." Elizabeth thought she sounded a bit more morose than she intended to. "That will simply give us a little more time to get to know one another." The man smiled before introducing himself. "My name is Azra. It's very nice to meet you." "Elizabeth," she returned his introduction. "That's an interesting name." "It's a very old family name." He stopped when he noticed Elizabeth rubbing her temple again. "Do you get headaches often?" "More often than I would like," she admitted. "My mother would probably say that I'm working too hard. But what would she know? She never worked a day in her life and wishes I'd have done the same." "You seem to have some harsh feelings towards her," he observed. Normally, Elizabeth would have thought that this was intrusive, but with Azra, everything felt natural. Before Elizabeth could respond, the server came back with a glass of water. "Can I get you something else?" she asked. "A coffee, please." Elizabeth wanted to ensure she had the energy to go back to work on.
"Yep, coming right up,"
The teenage waitress said, and retreated into the kitchen area of the cafe. It took Elizabeth very little time to notice that the server had not asked Azra what he wanted. That was rude of her.
"She didn't even acknowledge you," she pointed out to him. "Do you want me to flag her down again?"
"Oh no," he said with a chuckle. "That won't be necessary. I've been here 3 times before, and the staff only seemed to notice me once. It's okay."
"Okay,"
Elizabeth said, flabbergasted.
"It's most certainly not okay. They shouldn't ignore their customers. I should consider this when it comes time to tip."
"I have your attention." He stopped her again from getting the attention of the waitress. "And that's good enough for me right now." Elizabeth was put at ease by this statement. Something was different about Azra. She didn't feel romantically interested in him, but she felt an almost disturbing calm while she was with him, as though nothing else mattered. It was as though, for the first time in her life, Work could wait. So you're a busy woman, Elizabeth, he said with another smile. I imagine it takes a toll on you.
Not as much as you'd think. Elizabeth swallowed her last sip of white wine. I'm tired from time to time, but that's about it.
You're still nursing that headache, he mentioned to her hand that was still adamantly rubbing her temple.
I guess you caught me.
She let out a soft chuckle on her own.
These do come around every so often, but nothing I can't handle.
I'm sure that's what a lot of people think about a lot of things.
He began to look out of the same window she was staring through when he arrived.
You know, 2 years back, a man crashed through that window in his car. He thought it was fine to drive after a few beers. He thought he could handle himself. Azra paused a moment, as if to try to find the right words. The little girl that was sitting in that booth never had a chance. Her time came earlier than most.
I never heard about that.
Elizabeth's voice broke down as she spoke.
Was that your daughter?
No, Azra looked back at her. But I did meet her mother a year before the accident. My point is this. You should never assume you can handle something without knowing all the details or what's at risk.
Here's your coffee.
The perky server returned with too much spring in her step.
Can I get you anything else?
Yeah. Elizabeth knew the next thing she was going to ask seemed rude and out of character for her, but something inside her made her ask anyway.
Do you know anything about the girl who died here?
She immediately wished she could take the question back.
Oh, you must mean Doris.
The young waitress looked a little solemn now, but maintained her primarily happy disposition.
She was an amazing woman to work for. She and her husband built this place together in the 1940s. She never stopped working. It was hard on all of us when she died. She just kind of slipped into the break room and passed away in her favorite chair.
This wasn't the story Elizabeth was looking for. But before she could say anything, the server was already lost in nostalgia, and she wandered away from the table. The story did, however, make Elizabeth think of her own life again. Maybe you should call your mother, Azra said, as though he could read the look on her face. We should try to never leave things in a bad condition, especially relationships. Elizabeth thought about arguing with Azra, but a single caring look for him shot down any argumentative desires. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed her mom's number. The conversation was much easier than Elizabeth had expected. Her mother was too excited to hear from her for the first time in 3 years to be angry. The two of them laughed and reminisced, and ultimately became mother and daughter once more. They forgave each other for any harsh words they exchanged and promised to find a way to see each other as soon as possible. It was a very good phone call.
Thank you,
Elizabeth said, wiping a tear from her eye right before her headache pulsated with a particularly bright flash that nearly brought her out of the chair. It's time, Elizabeth. Azra stood up and looked at her with a knowing look of sympathy as he reached out a hand to her.
Your appointment?
She stood up to shake his hand as well, but he did not grab hers yet. Don't you see, Elizabeth? He looked into her eyes, and she felt the same restful comfort wash over her again. You are my appointment. Elizabeth was confused.
What do you mean?
She said.
I didn't set up a meeting with you.
No, you didn't. But you are my appointment. Just as Doris was my appointment in the break room. Just as that little girl was my appointment 2 years ago. Just as the worker who fell from the scaffolding in 1943.
Are you saying...
Elizabeth stopped to realize what she was saying.
Are you saying you're here to kill me?
No, Elizabeth. Your headaches weren't from being overworked or stressed. The tumor is what sent me here. Now, it's time to come home. Elizabeth considered running, but could not bring herself to do so. She trusted Azra like no one else she'd ever met. All at once, she noticed that the cafe had become hectic around her. People were crowding around and staring at her feet. She looked down to see herself lying on the floor below. Take my hand, Elizabeth. We have a long journey ahead of us. Elizabeth allowed Azra to take her hand, to take her away from the cafe, and to take her away from this world and to whatever lay beyond it. All the while thankful for the gift he'd bestowed on her before he kept his appointment.